This week on the Hollywood and Toto Podcast, the boss is back on tour and Bruce Springsteen is doing the most un-American thing possible overseas. We'll explain. And we talked to the co-host of Red Pilled America, Patrick Courrielche. Now, Red Pilled America is like NPR, but for the right, and they back up their storytelling with the truth. How refreshing.
Welcome to the Hollywood and Toto Podcast. Entertainment news and reviews without the woke Hollywood narrative. Free speech, free expression. Now that's entertainment. And here's your host, award-winning film critic, Christian Toto.
Legacies are precious. You hate to see a great ball player play beyond his time, where, the skills have faded. He's just not the same hitter he used to be, but he keeps on keeping on because he just can't give up the dream. You understand it, but it hurts to watch. I remember a couple of years ago watching Clint Eastwood in Cry Macho. It was a Western-ish kind of story, but it was certainly leagues beneath his talents. That was tough to watch too. He's the greatest. You don't want to see him in that capacity. And by the same token, we're seeing some pop culture superstars essentially destroying their legacies in real time. The first one that comes to mind for me is Howard Stern. Now, I grew up in New York. I loved Howard Stern. You can judge me all you want, but I just thought he was an absolute breath of fresh air. He deconstructed radio, kind of showed us the behind the scenes look at what happens with a show like that. Amazing interviews. Yes, he was raunchy and bawdy and out of control. I get all those things, but listen, I was younger. It appealed to me. It seemed revolutionary at the time. And the one thing that he really focused on, he really drilled down on, was free speech.
I don't know what Baba Booey means, actually.
Now, it was personal to him. The FCC was always fining him, attacking him. There were different groups trying to shut him down. So he took it personally. And I get that. And then in the last few years or so, I've drifted away from his show. It just didn't connect with me the same way. But more importantly, we faced a new dilemma when it came to free speech. It wasn't about radio or shock jocks. It was about the woke mindset.
You can't say that.
It was about cancel culture. It was about comedians being told, you can't tell that joke or there's going to be consequences. And I thought, well, who better than Howard Stern to weigh in, to fight that good fight? He's done it before. He'll do it again. Instead, he went whisper quiet. Matter of fact, he became part of the machine, part of the blob, if you will. Didn't seem to care about cancel culture, but he certainly cared about promoting Democrats during election cycles. He had on President Joe Biden. Not a single question about his diminished mental capabilities, even though we all saw it. And then, of course, he had on Vice President Kamala Harris, again, to push the Democrats over the finish line. Instead of being irreverent, instead of speaking truth to power, instead of being the Howard Stern that I knew and loved for years and years. No, this Howie was way different. He liked being the center of attention. He liked being accepted by the cool kids in Hollywood. In a way, he's become almost a parody of what he once was. And, I just wish he would have retired years ago before we saw this side of Howard Stern. Another example is Neil Young, the great classic rocker. He was all about free speech in the 60s and 70s. He went on a free speech specific tour in the 2000s during the George Bush years. So he really cared about speech. And of course, he was a great musician, no doubt about it. And then during the pandemic, he raised his hand and said, hey, wait a minute. I've heard Joe Rogan on Spotify, and he's sharing the wrong information and the wrong opinions on the COVID-19 virus. And you know what? You've got to fire him. And if you don't fire him, Spotify, I'm taking my glorious music off your platform. Now, there's a lot of things wrong with that from a free speech perspective for sure. But also, as it turns out, Rogan was more right than wrong. And the mainstream media was more wrong than right. And yet he didn't complain about the mainstream media and some of the narratives they were sharing. He was complaining about Joe Rogan.
It's either him or me, innit?
And of course, eventually he put his music back on Spotify. Joe Rogan just got bigger and bigger along the way. And the legacy of Neil Young took a significant hit. And that's a shame. And that brings us to the boss, Bruce Springsteen. Bruce Springsteen has been chipping away at his legacy for some time now. Now, a few years ago, he went back on tour, and turns out the ticket prices were exorbitantly high, huge. Now, you could say, he's the boss, he's a legend, he's an icon, it's worth every penny. But what about his fans, those blue-collar types, the one he's been singing to? He's been singing about the working man's blues for decades now. Doesn't he care that they can't afford to see him anymore? Isn't that a problem? And at the time, he shoved the controversy off to his manager, who did some tap dancing on his behalf. And then later, Bruce Springsteen said, hey, I'm just doing what my peers are doing. You know what? I'm 73 years old. I'm hustling my tail off. And he does. And there's no doubt about it. But does he need all those profits? Doesn't a working man, a blue-collar hero, understand what's going on in the culture and that his fans, his true blue fans, maybe couldn't afford even the cheap seats?
We'll have a coupon day or something.
He didn't care. Of course, now the boss is overseas and he's trashing the country that he calls home, the United States, and more specifically, Donald Trump. Here's what he had to say. In my home, the America I love, the America I've written about, that has been a beacon of hope and liberty for 250 years, it's currently in the hands of a corrupt, incompetent, and treasonous administration. Tonight, we ask all who believe in democracy and the best of our American experiment to rise with us and raise your voice against authoritarianism and let freedom ring. Interesting. Doing it overseas, certainly not cool, not the decorum you'd expect from an icon like Bruce Springsteen. Also, what about the last president, the incompetent one, the one whose cognitive decline we can all suddenly talk about? Did Bruce Springsteen say a syllable about President Biden for the past 4+ years? If he did, I didn't hear it. I don't think you heard it either.
It's the sounds of silence.
Nothing. Springsteen didn't pipe up about wokeness, about cancel culture, about the Twitter files, about the Biden administration trying to strangle big tech platforms so we can't say what we want to say. None of it. Didn't say a peep. Didn't say a peep about the Afghanistan withdrawal, and I could go on and on and on. You know, in an alternate universe where there's still a Springsteen, he might be writing a song, a powerful ballad about the late Laken Riley and what happened to her when open border mania hit the United States. Just terrible. And by the way, some of his anti-Trump statements were made in England, where if you share the wrong social media post, you could be arrested. You would think that someone like Bruce Springsteen, this artist, the standard bearer for Western culture, might weigh in on that. No, absolutely not. And of course, worst of all, he did all of this overseas, not in America. 2 reasons there that's a problem. One is, I suspect, given Trump's rising popularity, that he might not be greeted with all the cheers and attaboys that he expects from his blue-collar fans. He might have a few Trump fans in his audience, and it may not go well. I don't think he's going to do those spiels when he gets back to the United States. Just a thought, just a hunch. And by the way, you never go the full Dixie Chicks. You know that. Of course, the Dixie Chicks railed against President George W. Bush at the start of the Iraq War period. And you can love the Iraq War, you can hate the Iraq War, no matter what you think about it. Going overseas and blasting the president, not exactly what many people do. It just doesn't work out well. And of course, their career really never recovered from that situation. No, I don't think that's going to happen to the boss. He's still just too big, too much of an iconic performer. But certainly his legacy is being chipped away brick by brick, and he's doing it by himself. So you would think that a guy like Springsteen would know you never go the full Dixie Chicks, but he did. But then again, Bruce Springsteen doesn't even know his own brand. That's just a shame. Say what you will about NPR, and there is a lot to say about it, from please, dear Lord, defund it right now, from the government's teat to the fact that they don't really cover the news in a fair fashion. But boy, that programming sounds amazing. Those soothing voices, the great production values. It's a first-class operation without getting into the actual meat and potatoes of the content. Now, for years, the right had nothing of the kind, nothing NPR-esque that they could share, that they could talk about, that they could enjoy, either on radio or in podcast format. But of course, along comes Red Pilled America, and changes everything. They have an NPR-like presentation, great production values, thoughtful programming, and it is a right-leaning podcast, no doubt. And you know what? The storytelling has the truth behind it. It has honesty behind it. It's good stuff. And it's unlike anything else in the podcast space, especially from the right. We've got great broadcasters, the Ben Shapiro's of the world, Chicks on the Right, so many people you can enjoy on the podcast format. But boy, there's nothing quite like Red Pilled America still. They're all alone. And boy, they're good enough to kind of hold the fort down, that's for sure. Of course, the podcast is co-hosted by Patrick Courrielche and Adriana Cortez, the husband and wife duo who swap duties on air. And of course, they've got their Fam Boogie section, which is a secondary show where they talk about the news of the day, and they get a little more personal on that program as well. But the meat and potatoes of Red Pilled America is the storytelling, the narratives, programming that often comes in multiple parts that really digs deep into the issues in question, reveals stories that you've never heard before, offers perspectives you don't get in the mainstream media. It is essential listening. If you're not listening right now, if you haven't subscribed, oh, please go do that even before you listen to the conversation. Now, I know Patrick is a busy guy. We've kind of known each other kind of behind the scenes for years, and I know he's just working round the clock to make a show like this possible. It is intense operation to get the sound, to get the facts, to get the research, to make it sound as beautiful as Red Pilled America does sound. So I was just glad to kind of wrest him away from the microphone, his microphone, and get him on this show because he, like few others on the conservative movement, understands pop culture, the media, Hollywood, and many more adjacent issues. So I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Patrick. He has some great insights into the show, how it's grown, thank goodness, and what could be coming next at Red Pilled America. Hope you enjoy the chat. I know I do. And boy, just go and subscribe. You won't regret it. Patrick, welcome back to the show. You know, I've been following your work for years, and I know just surviving, let alone thriving in the podcast landscape can be brutal. So let's get a State of the Union type update on Red Pilled America, how you've grown, how it's expanded, what's different today. I mean, to me, it's the same great storytelling. I love the theme song. It's the same really dense narratives that have a lot of information, which I'm sure is torturous to put together from a production point of view. But you tell me how things have changed, grown, what's different, what's new. This is your baby.
Thank you so much, Christian. And you know what? I have to thank you. You've probably been the single media personality that has been with us from the beginning and promoted the show. You're a rare breed out there. So I want to thank you for that. We need more of you. We launched in November 1st, 2018. Wow. And I initially thought we were, I thought we were almost dead on arrival. Within a first couple of months, I just was disheartened by how difficult it was to break through all of the media landscape that's out there. There's just so much going on. But we, at the very beginning, we got a very nice following, a very devoted following. And they came to our rescue at one point. We thought we were going to have to stop the show. I think we were about maybe 3-4 months in, and turned to them and said, "We need your guys' help. We're going to do this series that tells the story of American manufacturing, and we're going to do it by telling the story of the American baseball cap." And we made a baseball cap, and they came to our. They saved us, and so. From there, we can kind of just continued on. And I think when we initially launched, the cancel culture thing was really big. And that ended up taking up so much of our content at the time. A lot of our storytelling was around that. And I'd say, that has changed over the course of the last couple of years, thanks to, people like Elon Musk who got X, has kind of led the charge on that. And I think even platforms like YouTube have gotten better. I think a lot of people diss YouTube, but they have definitely gotten better about allowing the Overton window to open up a little bit.
I agree. It was pretty bad for a while, though, I will say.
It was horrendous, and you just saw left and right people going, and so but I think the show has gotten a lot better. We've I was told by one of the founders of Friends of Abe, which is a kind of that secret Hollywood group that's defunct now, but it was kind of big when in 2009 to, let's say, I don't know, maybe around the time Trump, came around. Um, and I was told by him, in order to get good at writing, you have to do it every single day.
Yeah.
And I didn't even really ask him that question, but that was the answer that he heard a different question and he answered that question. And I really took that to heart, and I learned that every day, it's an everyday thing. You really have to be committed to it. It's like running.
Yeah.
And it never gets easy. If you're any all those runners or joggers out there, every time you put those shoes on and you lace up and you go out and run, it's hard every single time, but it's so rewarding at the very end. So luckily I learned that from Lloyd Chetwynd very early on, and kind of stayed committed to it. So now we still do at the time, at the very beginning, we did a lot of like one-off episodes, and we still do that. But we've kind of started leaning more towards the series type of series kind of format, where we're doing a deeper dive into series, or into topics.
Yeah.
We've done that with during the election. We started a Which Way America kind of series that we're probably going to be doing every election cycle, where we kind of look at both candidates and kind of give a overview of what they stand for, and then tell the story behind each candidate. We did one behind the LA fires that happened at the beginning of this year, and now we're on this series, What's an American? That's kind of looking into American citizenship, and we're doing a deep dive into American citizenship and trying to kind of, as easy as that question sounds, what's an American? It was so much harder to answer it when you actually sit there and look at it. And so
it's a fascinating journey. I mean, but it's also so instructive. I'm listening to it now. And that's the kind of thing, honestly, that's what 60 Minutes should be doing. That's what some of these longer form news formats, these august, with all these resources at their disposal, they should be telling that story. And the fact that, a fairly new media enterprise like Red Pilled America is doing it, in a way, maybe it speaks volumes.
Yeah, I think Frontline does do that sometimes. They are one-sided. I have enjoyed the Frontline series on PBS throughout the years, but yeah, I agree with you. They should be doing more of it, especially when they're taking taxpayer dollars. They have the funds to do it. And that's been one of the things that's been so surprising to me, is that we thought initially after the first 6 months, we were going to have, a bunch of copycats of the show. And, here we are now 6.5 years later, and there's nothing. I mean, there's a few, like you'll have guys like Andrew Clavin will do a series, and you'll have, God, I can't,
Bill Whittle, I think maybe he's done something.
I'm sorry. Yes. Bill Whittle. Exactly. That's the name I was thinking of. So he's done some series as well. And so there has been some out there, but nothing on a consistent basis to where you're constantly putting it out. And I understand why. I mean, there's a reason why, sitcoms do like 22 episodes a year, or, and then have to take a huge break, is because it's incredibly hard to write a script in the way that we do. It's not just kind of getting on and kind of speaking off the cuff. We're having to do research. You're having to, find archival stuff, and they're audio documentaries. That's what we call them. And so it is very difficult to do. And I understand why now we didn't have a bunch of copycats doing it. I think we will, in the course of the next couple years, once people kind of catch on, because we're kind of this kind of a almost like a little secret still, we are, because we're audio only. We're not on like the kind of video heavy platforms, and people don't, I don't think people understand the success that we've been having. We've been able to make a very good living doing this, and it's only gotten better over the years, and it's going to get better. We're actually going to start busting out into YouTube and into video within the next couple months. And so, but I think because we've only been audio only, I think we've been kind of a little, kind of one of those best kept secrets to a lot of the media people that are out there.
Well, I think also podcasts and radio before it, there's a loyalty that's built in. I mean, it sounds like you established it pretty early, which is rare and wonderful. But also, it's the reason why you have no imitators is because it's really hard because you have the chops and you've got the determination. And listen, I crack wise on a video podcast now. The work, I mean, I listen to your shows, and as much as I enjoy them, there's a little part of me that is the producer side thinking, oh my gosh, the work, the research,
Mhm.
I mean, I could just sense it. And I've spoken to you behind the scenes, so I got to know what's going on. Give us a little peek at the What's an American series as far as maybe what people would be surprised to learn throughout that 3-part saga, because I mean, there's so much information. I'm not going to spoil anything because you have
Yep.
to listen to it all, but
Yes.
give us a little teaser of what maybe you were surprised by when you dug deep into the research.
It's one of those things where, so we were kind of inspired by the events that happened at the end of Christmas of
Mhm.
2024, where there was this big kind of discussion on H-1B visas. And it's the question of what's an American came out of that. And so we decided to dig deep into it. And one of the things that kind of has popped out is this the fact that when we spoke to a lot of our listeners,
Mhm.
they were very open about what American citizenship meant. A lot of them were actually, I'd say a lot of them aligned with more of my view of kind of like very protective and America kind of focused and,
Mhm.
100% allegiance to America. But there was a lot of openness to kind of dual citizenship and and even like, professing allegiance, out there to other countries. I don't think people quite understood
Mhm.
the aspect of what dual citizenship means, the fact that that a Congress can be dual citizens. Can you imagine,
Mhm.
congressmen in Washington D.C. actually being a citizen of another country and having allegiance with another country, and at the same time developing policies
Mhm.
that affect our both domestic and foreign policy. I thought that was kind of a surprising thing, and so we dug into that topic a little bit and learned that Congress does not have to divulge whether they are a citizen of another country,
Hmm.
which was very surprising to me. And
Yeah.
so there's no real way to kind of get a gauge of how many congressmen have a dual citizenship. So what you have to do is look at dual citizenship eligibility. And I was actually really surprised. A lot of people, kind of knock Israel and say, oh, they have too much power in Washington, D.C. I was surprised to learn that it was actually Mexico that had more representation in Washington, D.C. than Israel. The European Union had more representation than Israel. And that's not to say that that some of these, foreign entities don't have, sway. And I'm not
Mhm.
saying that in Washington, D.C. I'm not saying that about Israel as well. But so many people are so focused on that, and they're looking and they're missing all these other things
Yeah.
that are out there. So that was one surprising thing that we found. Another surprising thing we found is just the founding of America. I think so many of us have learned, and this is really kind of looking at the education system and how so many kind of on the right or conservatives or Republicans have kind of exited the institutions and
Mhm.
allowed these kinds of leftists to come in and take over the institutions and define our history. And so what you learn is when you look at the history of America is that a lot of people say that it was based on racism, and
Mhm.
there was definitely some race aspects to it. But people forget the context of what was happening at the time of our founding in regards to why they were focusing on a certain inspiring, or I should say, incentivizing a certain group to immigrate into the United States, and that was because they were persecuted in Europe, and they were concerned with their survival.
Mhm.
They, in the same way that, let's say, the Jews are concerned with their survival and want to create a state for the Jews in Israel, Americans and Protestants in particular, we were almost 90 or over 98% Protestant country at our founding. They were concerned. They had the memory of their ancestors being burned at the stake in Europe, and they wanted to have people that immigrated in the United States that matched with them or fit in culturally, which is why the language was written the way that it was. So that was kind of a very surprising thing to learn, because I was always told, and I have some Mexican heritage. My my grandparents are from Mexico City and Durango. And so I was kind of learned at a very young age that so much of the foundations of America was built on racism, but I think it was more built on survival and a desire to create a culture that wouldn't persecute them in the way that they were persecuted in Europe through these kinds of, religious conflicts that were happening.
And I think that's the kind of thing that would never ever make a feature film. So we kind of need alternate resources to find out these kinds of information. By the way, over the years, and maybe even thinking more recently, what are the episodes or themes that have ruffled the most feathers or gotten the most reaction? And is that something you lean into, or is it just impossible to predict?
It is kind of hard to predict, but you do get a gauge. I'd say the biggest thing that we've had that was kind of that caused the most noise, that was a kind of a surprise to me at first, was when we did a deep dive into The Sound of Freedom.
Uh-huh.
I was very surprised to learn about and this is something that's probably going to upset some of your listeners.
No, it's okay. You go.
Yeah, so it was one of those things where we started it off as a friendly review, just trying to do like what you do. We were trying to promote a movie, and we were really excited about this Christian themed kind of film, the kind of subtly Christian themed film. And so we started doing a deep dive into it to do almost kind of a puff piece, and when we started to dig into it, we learned that about Tim Ballard and his past, and that some of the story that he was telling was fabricated.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very kind of, it wasn't just little minor things that, like with every kind of major television or major movie thing. It was major things like this, like the kid that gave him the dog tag was that according to court documents never happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so we kind of took it from there and dug deep into that. And it was one of those things where, like, okay, if we are supposed to be one of the things that we promised, the only thing that we promised for the show is to tell the truth. And so if we're digging into this thing, and we find it, how are we not supposed to kind of dig deep into it? And that one was a very tough story because it started to touch on people that I respect, like Glenn Beck, who'd been in close association with Tim Ballard. And we kind of were having a very hard time finding a single person that this man has saved. Or excuse me, I should say child that this man has saved. And so we started to divulge that information and show court documents and get very, like, we got Freedom of Information Act and found documents that he authored, Tim Ballard, while he was working for the federal government. And in his own writing would say that he didn't speak to the person this child that he said that he had this, very emotional moment with. The audience was almost like we stung them by, it was like they couldn't believe that. And at first they were like, oh, you guys are jealous. You guys are just jealous of the success of this movie. No, we actually started off to being a puff piece on this show. And so, we've had before we started doing the show, we've had a lot of success in Hollywood. So it was not something that we were, we've done shows on other movies that we've promoted, throughout the years, whether it be Nick Searcy's movie or whether it be Unplanned, or we can go down the line of movies that we've promoted, Mel Gibson flicks and what have you. So, but the reaction to that was very surprising. But I will say that once we got through it all and we gave all of the information, we had so many people come back to us and say, you know what, we're sorry. Our audience got so much more solid after that. We have like we call it the fan bam. We have a very devoted audience because of that moment, because so many people felt like, oh God, we were fooled by this. And thank you for sticking to your guns on this. So that one, I would say, is probably the biggest one that ruffled the most feathers.
I want to share a couple of thoughts. One is, I know Andrew Klavan was, he chased some people away after 2020 election when he didn't think there was enough facts to say that Trump had really won the election. And he's openly talked about how he lost fans, and he thinks a lot of them came back after they realized he was just telling from the best of his perspective with the best facts at his disposal.
Yeah.
But also, I was fascinated by your show's journey in that regard. And by the way, I'm going to imagine you'd have to be a subscriber to go back to those old episodes. Is that correct?
Yeah, we do. We play a rerun every week, but we have over 200 and we're closing on 210 episodes. So yeah.
But what's so fascinating about that particular moment in time from a journalistic point of view is that the press was so eager to ransack that movie in any way possible. They beclown themselves so aggressively by taking these silly attacks when all they needed to do is to dig into what you did and maybe build upon it, share it, do their own research based on the nuggets you found. And they never did it. So that was fascinating. And again, because your team has the ability to go through court documents, and I'm not an investigative reporter, I just couldn't do it, but you can. That's a critical moment. And I met someone recently who works in this conservative media space, and it was a New Year's party, and he said to me, "Punch up." That was his advice to me, and I think you did that, and I think you came out stronger for it. So kudos on that. And again, you can like the movie and appreciate the fact that it had certain values, but there's a story behind the movie, and the fact that you investigated it with courage, it means something. Um, I'm curious from your perspective. You're not a new journalist. You've been doing this for years, even before Red Pilled America. What have you learned either about journalism or about the culture at large through this whole journey? Because I feel like you're in the belly of the beast, you're making these shows, but can you step back and think, what have I learned about life or culture or something just because I've been through this journey?
Well, what I have seen is as the change in media over the course of, say, the Andrew's early days. For your listeners that don't know me, in 2009 I wrote a piece for Breitbart News that was their first big national story. It was a story about the National Endowment for the Arts and Obama's attempt to use it to change uh, the narrative on his Obamacare. And I caught the National Endowment for the Arts kind of getting all these artists together and trying to get them to create art to help change that narrative. And that was and it was a violation of the Hatch Act, and it forced the story that we did with Breitbart. It forced the resignation of a Obama appointee, and at that point in time, it was conservative media was burgeoning. It was really trying to take on the legacy media and trying to force them to tell the truth and not be so tribal.
Mhm.
Fast forward to today, and what I've seen with social media is that the rise of conspiracy theory has been so prevalent now. And you have these major conspiracy guys like Ian Carroll who have gotten have made a huge platform for themselves, questioning everything. And I put a lot of this on the legacy media. They have made it such that we want to question everything that has ever happened. But there are people out there like Ian Carroll who have taken advantage of that now. Now they've taken advantage of this distrust in the legacy media and go out, like I saw him on the Rogan show, basically arguing that Andrew Breitbart was assassinated, and hasn't done very much research into it, obviously, because the people that are probably the biggest protectors of Andrew would have dug into that question. Everybody that was close to Andrew knew that he was having heart problems, he was having health issues, and that is why he passed.
Yeah.
But you have a guy like that stepping so to get to your point, there is a huge amount of conspiracy theory media out there now that used to be kind of left to the Alex Joneses of the world, but are now have become these mainstream kind of, or they're entering the mainstream of social media. That has been troubling because it kind of goes against everything that Andrew Breitbart worked for, and that all of these early conservative kind of investigative journalists have fought against. And it's become more performative and less informational. And I think that is a big, big problem that we're having to deal with now. I don't, by saying this, I'm not saying that these people should be canceled or be deplatformed, but when they come out with this crap, they should be directly argued against and directly refuted, and point by point, tackle each one of these falsehoods that they put out there into the public. But it's become this kind of a thing where it's become so prevalent now, and I don't know how we put that toothpaste back in the tube.
Yeah, I mean, Alex Jones must be kicking himself because he's no longer the guy in this arena. He's got a lot of company. I don't know if it's an exact quote, but I think Andrew Breitbart, one of the things he said was more voices, not less. So that's the answer to that situation for sure. But I agree. And listen, I am the least conspiratorial person on the planet, and even I am looking around and learning what I've learned over the last 5 years. I'm thinking, wait a minute. So I get the atmosphere we're involved with, but we do have to stick to the facts. Why it's so important. One last question, and actually, I listened to a recent episode of your Fan Boogie sort of, I guess, I don't know, you call it a sidebar, a sort of a supplemental show, but you were naming some conservative pundits and your level of trust to them. I thought that was so interesting. I talk about Fan Boogie and how, to me, it's like going behind the scenes. And I love that because sometimes I'm in a car for an hour, then I'll put on your show. But if I don't have enough time, I'll put on like a Fan Boogie episode and go, okay, quick bites. Talk a little bit about sort of that newer endeavor.
Yeah, we started doing we did it early on where it was just purely backstage. It was kind of like a behind the scenes for every episode, and then the production for the show got so overwhelming that we couldn't do it on a regular basis. Now we've decided, you know what, we need to do it more often, do it consistently. So we do it every Friday, and it's kind of touching on cultural topics or things that kind of the narrative that's out there in media, and it's kind of a way for people to hear us outside of the show. The show is very, our regular audio documentary series is very regimented, but this gives us, and we also get a lot of times where people want to just hear our take on things. And so, and I think that is kind of the standard form of media within conservative media is this kind of topic, looking at these topics and commenting on these topics. So yeah, we've been trying, because we've been seeing so much of this conspiracy theory stuff happening on the right. We almost felt an obligation to come out on a weekly basis and kind of address these things. So a lot of times people will say, "Oh man, you're only punching conservatives and you're only coming at," because, well, we already know about the left. We already know about MSNBC. We already know about CNN. There's plenty of people doing that.
Yeah.
The only way to really create an ecosystem that's healthy and to solve the problem of the legacy media is to make sure that we keep our side on check. And when you have these figures that come forward and either make mistakes and don't correct them, and that's really all we're asking to do, is like when people make mistakes, correct them. That's the biggest. I mean, if none of us would exist if CNN, MSNBC, ABC News, CBS News, NBC News, if they just corrected the record when they made a mistake. This whole alt media would not even be alive. So, but at the same time, we can't replace that with all of these conspiratorial figures. We feel an obligation as kind of disciples of Andrew Breitbart to call it out when it happens. And so that's part of the, I'd say that's one of the main impetuses behind this, behind Fan Boogie, is to kind of, to keep Andrew Breitbart's legacy alive, and to make sure that if we're going to replace legacy media, we replace it with something that is a solution and is something better than what's been out there for the course of the last couple decades.
Yeah, and of course, you and your great wife. What I love about the show is that you don't have all the answers. It's almost like you're searching, you're going back and forth, you're kind of thinking on the fly, you're developing your ideas. Not like, okay, it's this and it's this. No, it's actually more complicated than that. And a lot of the issues do have significant nuance. So it just makes it all the better. And I also think if you listen to your more traditional show, it's just a great way to get to know you guys. I mean, just to kind of see, and the fact you've been married so long and you've got a daughter, it's just everything about it is sort of icing on the cake. But
Thanks, Christian.
yeah, well, of course, the show is Red Pilled America. Please subscribe, whatever your favorite podcast platform is. You will find it. Looks like there's a video component coming soon. We can look forward to that. But also just go to redpilledamerica.com. You can get merch. You can get news updates. You can get all the episodes, find out how to subscribe, how to donate. This is a unique property. It's been that way forever. We just talked about that. If you want to see more of it, if you want to support it, that's how these things exist. There's no major billionaires throwing money our way. It's the fans, it's the loyal fans that make things happen and make things thrive and survive. So please consider that as well. But Patrick, thanks so much for your help. And I love the fact that you're policing our side. We have to do more of that. You're doing it from a good place. And I think that matters as well. And of course, you bring the receipts, which is always the most important factor.
Thanks, Christian. I appreciate it. Hey, call us out too when we make mistakes.
I'm looking. I can't find any yet, but I'll get up my finger wagging as soon as I can. Thanks.
Thanks, man.
Your character actor of the week is Stephen Root. Well, that's it for the show this week. Thank you again to Radio America for having me as part of their great podcast lineup. And of course, if you get a chance, if you can like, subscribe, do all the things to help move this show along, get it up the algorithm stairs, I would appreciate it. And get a chance, check out hollywoodintoto.com. It is my website now in its 11th year, and it is like the show, The Right Take on Entertainment. Never want to chase our liberal friends away. Certainly not. There's lots of apolitical content, movie reviews, things like that. But certainly it is a right-leaning look at pop culture. And boy, there are so many things that are not being covered right now. We do it here, but we do it on the website as well. So check out hollywoodintoto.com. I appreciate it. Now go out there and have the very best week possible. Doctor's orders.